So who pays the closing costs in a real estate transaction? Well, that's a great question. And I'm Dee Martin with Dee Martin Realty Group, and I am here to help. So a lot of times we will see certain expenses paid by either a buyer or a seller. For example, sellers will typically pay for the title policy in our market. That's generally what we see. Now, of course, it's all negotiable. But a seller has the obligation to prove that they own the property, they have a right to sell the property, that there's no liens or judgments against the seller or the property that would restrict them from actually being able to sell it. There could be heirs involved that somebody else needs to have their signature on the dotted line in order to be able to sell that property. So the title company is going to do that research and make sure that that property is able to be sold. And so because that obligation or that burden lies upon the seller to kind of prove that that is their property and that it's sellable, a lot of times the seller will pay that. Another thing that a seller will typically pay are HOA fees. There are different HOAs and they all have different fees and different requirements of what they will require for each different sell. But a lot of times there are fees that are charged to transfer the property from one person to the next, or to give a resale certificate or different things. And so the HOA fees a lot of the time are paid by the sellers. Sometimes those costs are shared. Again, it's all negotiable, but a lot of the times we see the sellers paying for that. Another thing, of course, is the sellers pay their portion of the year for property taxes. Now, when it comes to buyers, they have the loan costs. So if they have a lender, they're going to have the loan origination fee, the appraisal fee. So there are some costs involved for them that have to do with their financing or their loan. And if there's a survey that's required for the property, sometimes the seller will have a survey and they will share that with the buyer. And the lender and the title company may not require them to purchase a new one. But sometimes there's not a survey on file, or another one just has to be done for various reasons. Maybe it's too old, maybe it's blurry, maybe they can't really read it. But what happens with the survey is typically in our market, we see that as a buyer cost. I think the reason for that is because the lender requires it. So the buyer really needs it for their loan. And also the buyer's going to own the property. So they're the ones who really need to know where the property boundaries are and the corners are of the property and the setbacks and all the things that they need to know in case they want to add a fence or a pool or a chicken coop. So it's important for the survey to be in the hands of the buyer so that when they live there, they know what they're getting into and what they own. So a lot of times we see that as a buyer cost. Another thing is buyers pay for home inspections during the buying process. They hire an inspector and maybe sometimes multiple inspectors. And so a lot of times the buyer may get more than one inspector. They may have a pest inspector, a home inspector. Sometimes they'll have a special septic inspector. They might even have somebody come check out a well. I mean, there's all kinds of things that a buyer might want to do in order to do their due diligence to know what kind of property they're purchasing. And so the buyer will pay for the home inspections. And then, of course, they have their escrow fees. They'll have their taxes and insurance that have to be escrowed in if they have a loan. And different lenders require different amounts of months paid in advance, but they'll have those costs as well. So there are different costs for buyers and sellers, but again, it's all negotiable. So you just don't know really who's going to pay until you get into a transaction and you have some negotiations start happening, and those terms are all laid out in the contract. So I hope this helps. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We would love to have you follow us, and we'll keep sharing all the information that we have about Tyler, Texas real estate. Thanks for joining.